a pretty easy place to go is just to cut training budgets. I mean, that's a very easy and logical thing for companies to do. And I appreciate that. And there are tough situations and tough decisions to be made, but that's really a very short-sighted way to think about an investment in talent. Like if I can help somebody who wasn't necessarily thinking about getting a college degree, get a college degree later in life, that helps them get a mortgage or helps them buy a home or helps them, helps them maybe educate others, or their pride is fuller than it was. We've done really good work there. Hi, it's Paul Marchand, EVP of HR of Charter Communications, and you're watching Macrotalk.
Paul, it's great to have you. Thanks for being on.
Thank you for having me, Hope.
When I first met you in the fall, winter of 2025, I was really struck by how candid you were around the type of investments that companies make for training their employees. And just to catch folks up, this dinner was held by Guild. They're a partner of yours. They create these training materials for some of your workforce. And I think I posed this question to you at the table and to everyone at the table, which is, I don't hear a lot of companies on earnings calls talk about their investments in their people, because it's obviously an expense. Investors want to see returns. And I said, isn't this sort of like a cost center, right? This is something that maybe investors don't want to hear about. And you were very candid and very frank with your answer. And that really struck me because I've never really heard that sort of admission.
Yeah, no, thank you. And I did enjoy that evening together. And I did enjoy meeting you for the first time there. And so I'm glad we're able to catch up here. I might not be able to exactly replicate what I said because it was so long ago, but the spirit of it is that, I think organizations have a commitment to develop their talent. And I don't know that anybody would argue about that principle. But, the Guild initiative and what we do for our workforce is, I think, a bit more than that. And I think the return on that investment has multiple areas of payout. Mm-hmm. So first and foremost, we make a proclamation, and we pivoted to this about 3 years ago. It will be this coming summer, whereby instead of calling it tuition reimbursement, we call it tuition assistance. And instead of it having a target audience of probably more of the existing educated population of a workforce at a company, whereby they're going to pursue additional degrees or even graduate level degrees, we're going to focus really on our workforce that interfaces and interacts and works closely with our customer base. So what we would call our frontline workforce. Mm-hmm. And that's where we're going to focus the benefit and the initiative. And they were not a high participant or user of tuition reimbursement because of the way reimbursement programs were designed and historically utilized. And so the pivot to an assistance program is just that. We want to help people improve where they stand in society, and we know education is a key component of that. And if I can help somebody who comes to us as a worker who maybe has a GED or started down a track of a college degree with maybe a semester of classes or maybe even a completion of an associate's degree, and I could take them all the way through getting an actual full diploma, I actually do a number of things. First and foremost, on the human level, I help that person move up that sort of pathway of success. Education leading to further compensation, leading to potential home ownership and fulfillment that way, sort of the success hierarchy. I also help them by improving their capabilities and their tools and their knowledge and their skills. They in turn help us. And that's the kind of ROI that maybe people don't initially think about. They help us because, number one, they become more committed to our organization. I think I'm creating a more sticky relationship and a more tenured relationship than I would have otherwise. Mm-hmm. I also think that I have them become committed to our customers. And in return, if they're more skilled and more committed to our customers and are more focused on a better customer experience, in the end, my business goal of having existing customers retain longer and new customers acquired is really met or exceeded, which ultimately pays for the program itself, right? So longer customer retention, new customer acquisition is a critical objective as a business model for us. And that experience between the employee and those customers is a critical point of differentiation. So yeah, I sort of made that statement that on its face, it is an expensive program. And um, and one could easily, if they were thinking just financially, look at that as a way to sort of reduce costs and eliminate and move on. But we've built sort of a commitment to this, and we're seeing it pay off. And I think it's the right thing to do for the company, the right thing to do for our customers, and really the right thing to do for our employees and the society that we live in. So I think it's worth the investment, and I think companies should think about evolving whatever they do today in the area of tuition reimbursement or tuition assistance and migrate more to a model that I'm suggestive of. By the way, it takes time for somebody to complete an undergraduate degree. It's semesters upon semesters of education and building blocks to get you to that degree. And so it's not a traditional 4-year program. It might take somebody 5 years or 6 years or 7 years. And if they're committed to us during that time frame, that also creates a longer tenure of that worker as a Spectrum employee. So there are a lot of ROIs, some tangible, some not tangible. But yeah, I sort of made a declarative statement in that meeting or that dinner that this is something companies should do and that we value, and it's really worth its weight in gold.
Are you able to share any numbers around the retention of those who sign up for this and stay on for X number of years where you do see that return? I'm sure when you're at the board, you've got to come armed with that
Yes.
data.
So the program is sort of twofold. It's actual degree-based track or certifications, etc. Degree tracks gets you down the path of a degree in marketing, a degree in finance or accounting, a degree in technology. The coursework gets you down into a certificate in, say, maybe cybersecurity or network technician. So over 15% of the workforce has enrolled. We have a little over 90,000 employees, and more than 80% of those workers are really frontline focused workers. They're touching, serving, supporting our customers. So nearly 2/3 of those employees that are in the program, come from that frontline workforce. And so we're really seeing a take-up rate exactly designed for who we intended the program to be for. That's not to suggest that we don't still value further education by somebody who's in a more professional job title, but really the participants in the program we're seeing stay with the company at a 20% higher rate than those that don't participate in the program. So that's a really, really good ROI in terms of, sharing with finance and the board and others that it's worth its investment in gold because it's a higher retention rate by over 20 points. And they're more likely to stay with the company over time by at least 15 to 18 points. So yeah, we are able to point to it. Now, given it's 2.5 years in its making, we have a lot of people that have participated and completed certificates, and we have some people that are on their way to completing degrees. But as I said earlier, it does take time to complete a full degree. So we're still in the early stages of people saying, yep, I've got my undergrad or I've got my associates. We have a few because they came in with credits already begun, but it's really building and it's really seeing, a return in its early days.
And you're already seeing this even in this short window of time.
Yes. Yeah, because, as you can imagine, with a lot of frontline jobs, we do have turnover.
Yeah.
And it's easy to have us see an impact of something like this in that period of time because, if you're coming in to be a call center representative or a store agent, it is very possible that after doing that role for 6 or 9 or 12 months, that you don't see it as a fit, or you're not necessarily interested in doing it long term and you depart. So we're able to have good data on retention because of the nature of those jobs. And we are seeing a big difference between participants versus non-participants. And then those that do participate, they become more motivated. They're inspired because of the classroom kind of programming and the commitment by the company, that they actually start to think about career progression and career growth, which leads to the promotion sort of percentage that I referenced, that they're more likely to be promoted because they're in the actual guild program.
I think it's really an outstanding result compared to many companies that like to talk very vocally now about what part of their workforce is being automated away. And have you found these conversations to get more money for your programs to be a little bit more difficult as people are trying to find those margins and companies are at the highest levels trying to tell an AI story?
Yeah, I mean, I would sort of in some way divorce the AI story from the commitment to career development and growth, for the commitment to the customer that we want to serve, in the sense of having a higher skilled and a more qualified worker is an objective that we are committed to. AI is really an enablement to that strategy, not the driver of that strategy. And so what AI will do for us, it'll improve that employee that I was referring to,
Mm-hmm.
that very well may be in the guild program and doing an educational effort at night while they're at work during the day, supporting our customers. AI will improve their ability to service our customers better, smarter, faster, with more accurate information that doesn't require a repeat or a redo, right?
Mm.
Um, so it'll make for a better customer experience with that actual individual, whether it's an individual who's selling or servicing. The AI will be an enabler to that, not necessarily something that will take away from that. So I see those two things working together,
Mm.
not necessarily against each other.
All right, let's talk about the AI story a little bit later
Yep.
because I want to dig
Yep.
deeper and back into your programs,
Program,
specifically
definitely.
with the frontline workers. I've been talking to some folks in your industry, in your field, and some perspectives that I hadn't considered is just even accessing frontline workers to get them this training. People who are typically just behind a keyboard all day, they can do these trainings more easily, like within their hours, perhaps even.
Yep.
But you've got folks who are maybe out in the field, working in the real world. Then you've got, unionized workers who have their own rules. So the question really is, how are you accessing these frontline workers to bring them like on this journey when they are still, maybe constrained in their
Yep.
time and in their location?
Yeah. Well, this is one of the benefits of sort of the pivot from the traditional tuition reimbursement program to the tuition assistant model and to the guild program, where we have over 300 courses in the catalog and partnerships through guild with many universities, very prominent, very well established universities like Purdue and Cornell. And so, as you know from being in this space for the time you've been, e-learning has become a very common approach to how people are educating themselves, whether it's for a short 2-hour course or it's literally to complete 3 credits towards a degree. And so a lot of the ways in which we could really change the dialogue with our frontline worker is by providing this tuition assistance program versus tuition reimbursement. So the big difference are a few. One, tuition assistance doesn't require any upfront expense by the actual employee to register for the class, pay for books, and then get reimbursed on the back end. Tuition assistant takes all that noise out of it, and they register and we enroll them, and their pay is for that class is not something they need to worry about. That noise is taken away. We do that directly with Guild. Versus in the traditional tuition reimbursement program, I would have to register at my local university. I'd pay for my books. I would put the expense on my credit card or I write a check, and then I'd wait after the semester's completed and I show my grade, and then the company would pay me back, give me my funds back, just like they would do with maybe a T&E report or something. So that's very different. And for our frontline workers in the traditional model, putting any money out, in advance of getting a payback or a return is really
Mhm.
challenging. Some of them live check to check, some of them have more than one job. And so to take the financial noise out of it was one big hurdle. Second hurdle is actually, I think you were highlighting it, is these folks have, busy jobs, they're out in the communities, they have families. How can we help them be educated, but not necessarily send them to a physical building? And the virtual e-learning environment really helps them do that. They can register for a course, participate in lectures, do things online, do it at their own time, evenings, weekends. Does allow them to kind of complete the degree or the certificate, as opposed to going to a traditional in-person setting. Now, to be fair, there are some people that don't learn well online, and that's something we work through. And there are ways to take classes in person, but this program does democratize the opportunity for people to get a degree and do it kind of on their terms, funded by the company fully, and in a virtual environment, so they can care for a child, put them to bed, and log in and take a class, or do something on a weekend where a spouse maybe watching kids or taking care of an elders, and they can carve time away to actually take the class. And that's really a big lift for our frontline worker, whoever that might be, a technician or a call center rep or a store agent.
I think the clarification that I would love to understand is, if you are just simply trying to upskill a worker, let's say a technician who typically is not in front of a computer, are those hours that he has to take on his own? Or are you paying him for those hours if it's just
Yeah. Oh,
upskilling?
yeah.
That's, I think, especially
Great.
with unionized workers, because I think you may have to deal with those rules, right,
Yep.
around those
Yep.
hours. Can you give us some
Sure.
insight into how you logistically manage that?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So that's a great, great question. For our frontline technician roles, which you highlighted, we have a great program, which is a career progression program for them, where they actually are compensated for their time taking a class to certify and qualify for the next level of technician. So they progress from technician one to technician two to technician three, et cetera. And with
Mm-hmm.
each technician progression, there's a course and a curriculum that they need to complete, and an on the job demonstration of capability that they need to complete, and they are compensated for that. They are also rewarded for that by giving them an increase in their pay, as well as a bonus that recognizes their accomplishment from achieving level one to level two. And we've seen a really strong response to that with our field technician roles. And those are the people that really actually will enter homes or businesses and, deal with, an outage or a trouble call, or do installation services for new customers, which obviously we do have. And so you're right, we do have that program, which is not necessarily the guild program, but is
Yeah.
our own designed program to help with progression. We're fortunate in the sense that, we have very good relationships with our employees, that doesn't necessarily have us have unionization in most of our business units and business unit locations, albeit we still have or we do have some. But to the point you make, in the union contracts, we do abide by those rules and do compensate for that education. Um, and so, yeah, what I would say is, technicians are on a kind of a career pathway, or a journey, and we do support them with those type of educational benefits.
I know it's a little bit in the weeds, but I think it's
That's
important
good.
just to understand how you work through that, and
Sure.
to understand for the employee that I'm sure they ask these questions, right?
Yeah.
Am I being compensated for this extra
Yep.
work that I'm kind of doing?
Yep.
Is it's for the company? But then for the guild kind of programs where they're trying to grant their degrees on their
Yep.
own, those are sort of on their own time that you assist
Correct.
with those tuitions. Okay, great.
That's correct. Yeah, that's
Yeah,
on their time, but fully paid for by us. And in
yeah.
fact, um, you know, we didn't get into it yet, and we may not, but like, we think hiring kids right out of high school is an opportunity. And part of our story to those students is, you may not know what you want to study in college, and you may not be ready for college at that age, 17, 18 years old. Uh, maybe you're not certain what's right for you next in life, but you want to work, you want to contribute, you want to be part of a team. And we've had a nice track record of hiring high school students into our organization, and they start out in jobs and in roles and have a pathway. And then they learn about, or we use the program as an educational opportunity in the recruiting pitch,
Hmm.
and they learn about the opportunity to get a degree with us. And they enroll and they're on the pathway for maybe an associate's degree or a college degree. And that's going to be fully funded by Spectrum. So that's a great way of, but it's on their time, to your point.
Just final kind of question on
Yep.
just the kind of programs that you've been launching and leading the last 2.5 years. Can you share some numbers around the type of investment that you're actually putting toward these programs?
I mean, we don't publicize that type of information from a financial perspective, but I would say that, we're talking millions of dollars of investment in education for our workers. We have, as I said, over 90,000 workers in our company, and 80% of those are frontline. And so, you could just do the math. I mean, traditional educational benefit is, I think it's about 5,500 is the amount that the government sort of provides some tax breaks to corporations to provide as a benefit. Um, we're well in excess of that in terms of an individual who takes a class or classes, whether it's a certificate program or it's the degree program track that we talked about. Yeah, the investment is significant, I would say, in the aggregate, millions of dollars towards the educational benefit. And we're not afraid to spend it. As I said earlier, the ROI is very strong. So if you were sort of trying to get a gauge on that, it's in the tens of millions of dollars.
Per year or over a number of
Oh yeah,
years?
per year.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
Um,
yeah, if you have, a good 15% of the workforce in some type of certificate or educational program, that's going to add up pretty significantly. But again, um, I think the easy place for people to go, and I remember this from years ago when there was quite a bit of right sizing of companies, and I was at financial services at the time. A pretty easy place to go is just to cut training budgets. I mean, that's a
mhm.
very easy and logical thing for companies to do. And I appreciate that. And there are tough situations and tough decisions to be made, but that's really a very short-sighted way to think about an investment in talent, right? And I think ultimately what we're trying to do here is increase the capability of the worker, make them more skilled, more tenured, more committed, more invested, more loyal, and all the things we're doing together, Guild and other things are leading up to that. And if that can increase retention, which ultimately drives a better worker who serves that customer better, then we're ultimately going to have a longer life customer, which far in a way is the better answer for the business than necessarily short-term training dollars.
Yeah, I mean, you see the flywheel. I think you're also in a
Yes.
position with a larger company
Yes.
that there's a necessity in a way that maybe smaller companies can't. And I
Don't
think
have. Yep.
it's a good segue to let's talk about the more macro perspective on
Yep.
labor. Your role, your field specifically. The World Economic Forum, brings together lots of very important, powerful, influential people, and a lot of the conversations that I was listening into, they all were asked, these leaders, business leaders,
Sure.
Jamie Dimon and such, the same kind of question, which is, do you expect your workforce to be larger or smaller in 5 years?
Hmm.
And I think that's a fair question as people
Sure.
are trying to figure out the effectiveness of AI. How would you answer that?
I mean, I hope it's going to be the same or larger because I hope we're going to grow customers. Our objective here is to grow customers. We're certainly going to work to be more effective in our delivery of our services. But, in the end, a larger customer base, would necessitate the kind of workforce that we currently have at a minimum. Um, I mean, I can appreciate, maybe that sentiment from Jamie Dimon and others. And I understand this sort of, as you're pointing out, the macro story. Again, I see it as an enablement. I see AI and machine learning as an enablement, to make roles more effective and build more capability and more knowledge and more efficiency, if you will, from the experience somebody has, as opposed
Yeah.
to, things like I got the wrong answer and so I had to hold for another person, or I hung up and called back for a different answer. Um, Certainly, self-service is an approach that, my children who are, just going to be entering the workforce here shortly are used to, sort of a self-service, do it my way at my time mentality exist. And we see that in chat as a usage,
Mm.
but they're chatting with our people. There might be AI and machine learning behind some of the ability to make that chat more effective, but there are actual people behind chat. So I see AI and machine learning as more enablement than necessarily replacement.
I mean, I guess really, and Jamie Dimon's answer really was that he expects it to probably be smaller, was his
Right,
response.
right.
And but he also said that they weren't going to, in large quantities of
Yeah,
layoffs, like to
yes,
destroy their workforce either.
yeah,
But really, the heart of the question is, do you feel pressure to answer that question in the other way, which is, yeah, investors, if you're listening, we're going to have a smaller workforce. We're going to be leaner. We're going to
yeah,
be more efficient, more productive. Do you
yeah.
feel that pressure?
I don't necessarily see it as pressure. I think it has to be all grounded in your business strategy. Look, I actually worked at JP Morgan, and I'm actually a customer of the bank. And, at one point, people said there would be no more branches, right? I mean, I think actually that was a thing. They were going to shut branches because there was a thing called an ATM, and that was going to take over your experience. And the truth of the matter is that, I just went into a branch 2 days ago, and I interacted with the teller and I had a transaction and I know her name and it's in my local community and I value that interaction and that experience. And I place a premium on that as a customer. That doesn't mean I don't also use the ATM. That doesn't mean don't also use their app. Um, and so I kind of am more, when you say pressure and the investor community, I think our objective is to deliver revenue and to grow, profitability. And I think that's core to the products that we create and the services we provide. And we have a lot of homes and a lot of communities that we're in that we pass that we don't yet serve. And we want to serve those customers. We want them to sign up for our internet solutions and our mobile plans and packages. And I need people, if I'm the human capital leader and you think about the pressure that comes on me from the human capital, I need people to do that. I need people to
Yeah.
sell and service. Now, I think it's fair to say there are some aspects of work that will change. I'm not ignorant to that, and I'm not sort of suggestive that that's not a fact. And that may be the case, that some work gets automated or some work gets consolidated, and that AI and machine learning are the enablements to doing that, and you could be more efficient. I would like to see that then result in a further investment in the workforce that again interacts with my customer base. I
Mm.
want them to say, there's no reason why I would leave Spectrum because I have great service. They're reliable, they're fast, and when there's a problem, I'm talking to a person here in America who's taking my call or coming to my home and servicing me and supporting me, or I can go to a store that's near my house and meet with somebody in person that's representative of the company and sort of my agent, if you will, my human agent, not my AI agent. So yeah, so I think it's got to be tied to your business strategy. And the pressure I might feel is more about how are we going to continue to make sure we have the best frontline skilled workers than necessarily the pressure of the alternative.
I think that's fair. I think, being nuanced about it and being everything is kind of relative. And,
Right.
The range of companies that I speak to and reading into, it does seem to fall into sort of categories. Bigger enterprises that I speak with, those C-suiters are focused intensely still on talent development and pipeline.
Yes.
And then smaller companies are actually looking for leaner operations because of the nature of their business. They need to be high growth. They need to have people that they
Sure.
hire who can do 10 jobs at once if they're a
Sure.
startup.
Yep.
I was fascinated by, your confidence to want to talk about these things, especially because I think the perspective that people have of HR is like, they are not on your side. Like if you're a worker, like the last person you want ever
Right.
on a call, on an email is HR, that means that you are probably in trouble or there is trouble coming.
Yes.
And I think, you're like dedicated to this. You have a master's degree in
Yes.
organizational psychology. You apparently, from what I'm hearing, Pepsi is the Harvard of human resource operations. So
Yes.
that speaks to a lot of what you've done
Yeah.
before Charter. So what draws you to a field that is so fraught with so many negative,
Yeah.
perceptions?
Well, I definitely don't give those negative perceptions a lot of time and energy. I appreciate the perspective, and I understand there are people that don't have a good experience, and I think that's unfortunate, but I don't necessarily feel as if I'm personally responsible for that or need to lose a lot of sleep over that. I do care about the function in the aggregate, and you're right, I did spend time at Pepsi, which is considered to be sort of an academy for HR. I found myself there. I didn't start there right out of school, and I sort of, in a scrappy way, found myself into the function of HR. Truth be told, I was a a college student at Syracuse University with not a lot of clarity of what I wanted to do for my career. I thought I wanted to be in advertising. I ended up in retail, which was maybe a close second to that. But it was at that company where I became interested in talent and in people, mostly because of an interest in an individual who took an interest in me, and we ended up working together. And I started out doing college recruiting, hiring young talent out of college and knowing the importance of bringing talent in and training them and developing them and shaping them and forming them and providing almost like a graduate degree within the company itself. And that was at, May Company and Lord and Taylor, both no longer even existing. But my affinity for HR came out of the concept of recruiting and the necessity of great talent will drive great outcomes, right? And I think that has stayed to be a constant for me throughout my career in HR. But yeah, it's unfortunate that people have negative HR experiences. HR, in my opinion, plays the very important role between guiding and supporting and leading the human capital of an organization and working with management and leadership, but at the same time, a very important role of being the advocate of the employee. When the decision's being made in a big boardroom and there's not the voice of the employee there, and it's a decision about the impact to the workforce, I think that's where the HR person has to sort of speak up and provide the voice and the viewpoint of what a worker might think or react to about a strategy or initiative or a program or a change. And I try to do that. I try to think about the employee and the employee experience and represent them, balanced against the fact that, we work in a corporation that has to have profits and has to, pay workers and has to return to shareholders, an annual, outcome and result that's positive and not negative. So it's balanced in that we're in a for-profit business entity, but the advocacy of a worker, mostly taught out of my time at PepsiCo and others places, but it always is in the back of my mind. And I think the people that perhaps are giving it not the best reputation aren't thinking about that experience that worker might have, and putting yourself in the individual experience of that worker is really important, and it frankly hope it brings you back to the whole point of like the programs that we're working on for those frontline workers are really about, in the end, helping better them for the betterment of society, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
if I can help somebody who wasn't necessarily thinking about getting a college degree, get a college degree later in life that helps them get a mortgage or helps them buy a home or helps them, helps them maybe educate others or their pride is fuller than it was. We've done really good work there. That's a good story. That's a good outcome.
Yeah, and I don't think it's necessarily, always on the individual. I think by nature, a lot of companies don't prioritize that
Yep.
role, your
Yep.
organization until it is time for these tough decisions. And, I've heard through my reporting with other folks in your field that sometimes, you don't have the same weight in the
Yes.
boardroom and
Yep.
that you are sidelined. And that is not a
Yep.
matter, that's not on you, right? That's on
Right.
everybody else at the table.
Yep.
And so in your experience,
Yes.
what have you found to be the most effective ways that you have been able to get your
Yes.
programs approved and
Yep.
get the buy-in that you need?
Okay. I love your question, and there's a couple things to unpack there. Um, Not every person who an HR person interacts with, and now I'm speaking about leadership and management, all have had good experiences with good HR. And so you have to also put yourself in the shoes of the person that you're trying to interact with or trying to pitch or trying to convince or trying to sell, if it's about a program or investment or an initiative or just a decision. So sometimes you got to respect and understand that they themselves haven't had good HR experiences and interactions. And so they come with their predisposed position, judgment, views. So, a few things. One, there's nothing more proof points or more credible or more solid than just coming in and delivering and doing good work every single day. So building your functions brand and your personal brand in the organization that you work at and doing the things you say you're going to do and doing them well. That always, it's not even an HR thing, it could be a finance thing, a marketing thing, that always bodes well for improving the ability to have more weight at the table, improve the ability to, create new things or innovate things or get things over the goal line, because they're going to look at you and say, wow, well, you've been making progress or making improvements or making change, and you've done what you said you were going to do. So you could be counted on. That will give them the confidence and the trust to continue to count on you to do more. That's how you create, they say, the seat at the table. That's really not the point. The point is you want to solidify that seat and grow, right? And expand and improve, right? Getting the seat sometimes is not that difficult because there's an expectation that there needs to be somebody at the seat. But if you don't fill it properly, you're marginalized or you're not seen as critical, then you won't necessarily have the voice, but you still might have the seat. And so I think you got to do the work and you got to demonstrate and deliver. So results, number one, are key. Number two, I think you have to have the confidence to push back and to challenge. But you don't have to do it all the time, and you have to do it with facts and, measured emotion, right? And it has to come from a place of information, not of gut, right? So that's going to help you convince people to invest or to change or to evolve. And then thirdly, frankly, again, I go back to advocate for the employee. I think if you present to the management individual you're talking to an alternative voice, I think while they might initially have a challenge with that and not understand, well, what do you mean? You work for me, you work for the company. Why are you speaking about what that employee is concerned about? I think ultimately you turn the conversation and they see you as, okay, you're trying to help me see and make a decision here, and you're trying to bring the employee point of view. That's pretty valuable. They don't necessarily always hear that. They might hear it in a survey or, maybe in a 1-year employee review, but they don't hear it on a regular basis. So you bringing that employee perspective is really important. And I'll never forget at PepsiCo, one of the big messages was get out and be with the employees. Travel, visit sites, walk the floors. Don't just sit behind the desk, because you need to get the input and the understanding of what are their issues and concerns and how can you help them. And so I think those are some of the tactics, Hope. I mean, it is a challenging function, but I'm not one of those woe is to me kind of person. I don't sort of sit there and, try to be apologetic or try to say, why don't we have this seat? I sort of say, just go for it. Just do good work and just go for it.
I mean, I appreciate that. I think the other end of this that is totally out of your control is that it's not as if your entire department is hiring every single head that comes in. So ultimately you end up having sort of a tougher job because you have to come in and clean up, if there are issues. And I think that's just a result of the function. And I think that's where maybe some people have felt, in your field specifically, in your roles, like less power than they really can and want to have, because you're at the end of the funnel at times.
Yeah, well, no, that's true, Hope. But I think really good HR people aren't actually the end of the funnel. I think the manager should be at the end of the funnel, and HR supporting him in that process of offboarding and professionally and respectfully transitioning people to what's next for them. If it is true that an HR person's finding themselves completely managing that offboarding or exiting process, that's really in my opinion, a failure of the leader that person worked for, the manager that they worked for. Managers should make hiring decisions. I mean, managers are managers with the title manager because they manage people. They hire them, they develop them, they promote them, they build capability, they inspire them, they direct them. And they also at times have to say, hey, look, you're not a good person for my team. I need to make a tough call and you need to kind of move on. HR is there to support them with the tools and the processes and the capability building to make them the most effective managers they can be. And so I would say to any HR person, if they came to me for personal counsel and say, I'm sort of tired of cleaning up, I would
Mm-hmm.
say, you shouldn't be cleaning up. You need to change the conversation and the narrative. You need to get the manager owning the exiting process, or the, putting somebody on a performance plan process, or the difficult conversation process. Coach them through it, guide them through it, and then let them do it the next time and the next time and the next time. And then they'll build that muscle. That's what makes a good manager, in my opinion. And what is the adage? People join companies and leave managers, right? So I don't know that that's actually not, that's still true in my opinion. And I've been very fortunate here at Charter to have great managers who, by the way, not all the time agree with the things I propose from an HR perspective, nor had an appreciation of what the HR function can do. And it was my job to have conversations and discussions and debate to kind of prove those two things out. Sometimes, ending up in the development of a new program, and sometimes agreeing that, yeah, my idea probably doesn't make sense, and let's go back to the drawing board and figure something else out.
I think that you have, you're saying a lot of things that I think a lot of us can resonate with as workers and even as managers. We have a few minutes left. I want to really quickly just touch on offboarding
Sure.
since you brought it up.
Yeah.
What responsibility do you think companies have for a empathetic, I don't know, I don't really know the right word to use, but if we're looking at potentially mass layoffs, I recently interviewed the CEO of Pelgo. They're a new startup that's trying to focus on this offboarding process,
Yes.
and they feel like it's a great investment for companies. Is that something that you think you would be interested in, is investing in even the offboarding process to make sure that employees who do leave go on and have some sort of runway, or you can help them transition?
Yeah.
Really curious your thoughts on offboarding.
Look, I think if we took a lot of time and energy and made a lot of investment in bringing people into the company, we should equally be thoughtful about how they leave the company. And, it's an adage that I had from my days at Lord & Taylor, and it takes me to my days here at Spectrum. They may also be customers of ours. They may be people that are influencers of the decision makers who could be future customers or are our current customers. So we need to be really thoughtful about, we feel great about hiring somebody. There's a lot of rah rah in the bringing somebody on board, but there should be equally, and you use the word empathy, and I think that's a great word. I think respect is another great word. I think honesty is another great word. And I think fair treatment is another great word of the process in which people leave the organization. Now, there's lots of reasons people leave the organization. There's reasons for, the lack of alignment or the following of policies and processes and procedures. And those are situations which are more for cause, and, and there's poor performers. And those are for situations where, we tried hard to help with course corrective actions to help them become a better performer, but ultimately they're not performing to the actions that we look for, and we have to make a decision to depart. And then there's the decisions around just financial and restructuring. And, in all those cases, we should have empathy, and each one are being treated slightly nuanced, but especially in the situation where there's sort of a change, like you mentioned, a mass layoff of some sort. I mean, honestly, it pains me to hear that things are done via a group Zoom call. That really pains me. Like, I don't know. I think, again, I would say put yourself, HR person, in that person's seat, employee who you're telling over a Zoom call. Would you want that to happen to you? And that's a thing I've lived by, is try to do things. Now, we're not always perfect. Where we make mistakes. We're human beings, but try to live by a principle of, would you want that to happen to you in that way? And if you wouldn't, then what can you do to fix that? Okay,
Mm.
well, maybe the layoff process takes longer than you had planned, but try to have individual conversations with people. Maybe you can't get to every location because many people are remote. Well, at the minimum, try to have individual phone and video calls with people and explain and give them time and have a conversation and a process that properly exits them, offboards them, etc. You want to create an environment where that's what you're doing, and treat people in that way. I think that's a good principle to sort of live by. Put yourself in their experience and their shoes, and that might change the way you administer, or the way you handle a plan.
I mean, this isn't some earth-shattering revelation that you're
Yes.
sharing, and
No.
people. This is so simple, which is why I
Simple.
think it's so we're also flabbergasted when we
Yes.
see viral videos of this stuff happening.
Yes.
We don't have time today to get into, but I'd love to have you back, and
Sure.
we can talk more nitty-gritty about, like PIPs is another big, the big thing that I would love to get your take
Yes.
on. But is there anything else before we end that you wanted to share, just for today?
Look, I think the fact that you're engaging in these conversations and then you have people that are listening, I think is amazing. I think um, getting people to hear voices and hear points of views is really, really important. A lot of information is just out there and people are consuming it, and it's not necessarily fact-based or it's not necessarily credible. And I'm not saying I'm the most credible, but with 30 years of HR experience in multiple industries and companies, I have a lot more credibility than maybe some meme or some quick, reels scroll or whatever it might be. In closing, I would say, look, to the community within HR, it's a great function. It's amazing to come in every day and think that you can actually help make a difference in the employee and the worker's life or in future employee workers' lives. And I take that seriously. And each year and each day and each month, I think about what I can do different and better. And, the training was great, but it's a lot of on the job experiences. And I would say, to those in the function, stay the course. Try your hardest to cycle through a year over year over year experience at an organization to see different economic cycles, different leadership traits and roles, and go through different, kind of business environments. I do see a lot of HR people making moves and doing it real quick, and I'm not sure what they're getting out of it. I do think some tenure in position is critical to make you that much better, smarter, and maybe more empathetic or maybe more capable.
I like that. I think a lot of us have anxiety of like needing to get to the next level and
Right.
knowing that that's maybe the only way to jump. But we'll save all of that for
Yeah.
our next conversation. I hope that we
Happy to do
have.
it.
It was so great to chat with you,
Thank you.
Paul, and I hope that we connect again real soon.
Absolutely. I would love to. Thank you, Hope.